Hey friend, in this video, I'm going to be teaching you how to paint a realistic style watercolor flower in 5 simple steps. So first things first, painting realistic anything, any subject, whether it's a bird, a landscape, a flower, whatever it is, can be wildly intimidating, no matter what stage of the game you're in with watercolor. And so my first tip or simple step that you must do with any subject, I know it requires patience because it requires extra time, but it is to break down the subject into basic shapes. So every single subject on this planet can be broken down into a basic shape or combination of multiple basic shapes. So specifically with flowers, for example, if you're wanting to paint a realistic style peony, depending on the perspective of the flower, you will either start with a ball or a bowl shape if you're viewing it from the side, or a circle shape. So obviously the ball is the more three-dimensional shape or shape for a circle. But you have that for your peony to make it more full. And this is gonna be where you're basically directing and placing all of your petals. Because if you think about how a flower grows, you've got a stem, then you've got the flower with the petals on top. It starts as a ball, and then picture it like you're peeling an orange. So you've got the petals still connected at the base of the orange, or the peel connected to the base of the orange. That's basically how a flower grows. So if you start with the basic shape of a peony, you're gonna start with a ball, and then depending on how far it is in its lifespan, it will be a cone shape or a circle if you're viewing it from the top. So always, always, always break down your subject, break down your flower into basic shapes. You can have anything from a circle or a ball shape to a cone or bowl to a bell shape to a spear shape. There's a lot of different shapes of flowers. I cover these very in depth in my book, Everyday Watercolor Flowers, with multiple different types of flowers for each individual shape. So make sure you check it out if you want that more in-depth look. And then the second, so once you have your sketch down, a really light sketch of your basic shapes. So for your peony, it would be that bowl or ball shape, or you could do foxglove, which would be a bell shape, whatever it is that you're painting. You would then do your contour shape. So your second simple step is to do your contour shape. So sketching is, in my opinion, the most undervalued, underappreciated aspect of your watercolor art journey. It is absolutely transformative. I took one random junior college class, a sketching class, when I was in high school with my grandma. Like, I was just there for one class. It wasn't even for a full semester. She brought me to one class, and that one class completely changed how I view and paint any subject that I paint these days. So if you haven't really studied sketching, I highly recommend checking out some other YouTube videos that we have on my channel, but then beyond that, and then also my watercolor books, because I teach you more about sketching. But the contour sketch is basically, once you have your basic shapes down, those are your guides. And then you're gonna do the texture and the edges or the contour of the subject that you're sketching to then paint as your more concrete sketch. So this is gonna be your outlines of the petals, outlines of the stamen detail if you have that. So for like a sunflower, let's say, you're gonna be doing your C curve and then little C curves at the tops of the petals and C curve down to create that kind of teardrop shaped petal. You're gonna have the little detail around the disc or the bulb of the flower, the middle stamen area of the flower. So this is your contour step. So you start with your basic shape so that you have the proportions down, the perspective down, and overall it looks appropriately sized and shaped because you have the basic shape as your guide. And then your second step is going to be that contour step. Then you can erase the basic shape guide and move on to your third step, which is going to be your base layer. So the base layer, when you're working with watercolor, is usually going to be your lightest, transparent, most transparent colors. Unlike other mediums like oil or acrylic, where you work dark to light because they're thicker, more opaque, you can do that. Watercolor is a transparent medium, and so if you are doing your lights last, they're not going to show up as well because they're transparent colors, and so a light yellow isn't going to show up on top of a darker green or something like that. So you want to save your highlights when you're doing your base layer through the next few steps that I'll mention once we get there. So your third step is to apply your base layer. So if I'm painting a rose or something, and I know that my underpainting or my undertones in the rose are these pinky, rosy, blushy hues, then I'm probably gonna wash that color over the entire contour sketch within the lines of the contour sketch. Or I'm gonna do that on one petal and treat each individual petal like its own painting. And that's gonna make it feel less intimidating when you're painting something in a more realistic style. So your third step is to paint that base layer. So that's gonna be your really light, barely there hues, something like a light wash with a tint of a color in it, like your pinks or light yellows for sunflower, whatever. Your fourth step is going to be your midtones. So this is gonna be either done wet and wet or wet on dry, depending on the subject that you're painting. Some will require wet and wet blending with your midtones and your base layer. And so if you wanna show a very soft gradient or blend between your lightest tones and your midtones, then you're gonna do some wet and wet. So you're gonna you're gonna do every individual petal by itself first and then move on. So you're gonna do your base layer, so your step 3, and then while your base layer is still wet, you're gonna apply your midtones so that the base layer doesn't dry and you're using wet and wet technique. If you're very unfamiliar with watercolor, please start at the Complete Beginner's Guide to Watercolor video that we have on this channel. It goes very much in depth into wet and wet versus wet and dry and all of that. So wet and wet painting between your base layer and your midtones, or sometimes depending on the shadows and the type of flower that is, you might want more harsh, more distinct midtones. And so you'll be using a technique called wet and dry. Again, check out the Complete Beginner's Guide to Watercolor if you're still unfamiliar. So then your fourth basic or your fourth simple step for painting realistic flowers is going to, did I say fourth yet? No, that was fourth. So your fifth. So your fifth and final simple step for painting a realistic watercolor flower is going to be your details. So we have our base layer. First of all, we have basic shapes sketch. We have our contour sketch. We have our base layer. We have our midtones. Sometimes we do them wet and wet. Sometimes we do them wet and dry. And then we have our details. This is I will leave a 1% chance that there is a chance that you would do it wet and wet. But 99% of the time, your details are gonna be done at the very last stage and when the rest of the painting is dry, for the most part. There's probably an exception to these rules. But for the most part, you're gonna add your crisp, hardline details, and they're usually thicker consistency, your pigment to water ratio. If you don't know what I'm talking about, pigment to water ratio, watch our tea to butter exercise video. That's a really good one. If you struggle with water control and getting your colors really thick and opaque with watercolor, check it out. But your details are usually in that butter range or even heavy cream to butter range so that they're more opaque, they stand out. They give your realistic paintings that pop that you really need, that provides that depth, that makes it look realistic. If you leave it in the third and the fourth step phase, it's just gonna look kind of blah. So the final step, the detail step, is really what makes your realistic paintings pop. And so that's why realistic paintings aren't like they require these extra crazy talents. Obviously, it does take a lot of practice to get there, and there is some talent to it, obviously, that you can develop with time and practice. However, it's not as complicated as most people make it. It just requires a lot of patience. And so a lot of people give up too early, or they don't start with the basic sketch, and so it messes up the whole perspective of the painting. So be really patient. You might need to spread it out across a couple of days, few days, whatever, so that you take breaks and have fresh eyes. But realistic paintings, whether it's flowers, landscapes, animals, portraits, whatever, the main fundamentals are those 5 simple steps and a lot of patience. We have a lot of different videos on this channel that show how to paint realistic flowers, individual types of flowers, so we'll link to those in this video. I also have, and I mentioned already, my book, Everyday Watercolor Flowers, that breaks down each individual shape of flowers with multiple different types of flowers as examples, and shows you how to paint each one and sketch each one. So make sure you check that out as well on Amazon or at your local bookstore. And as I mentioned before too, if you're just getting started with watercolor and you want to dive deeper, make sure to check out the Complete Beginner's Guide to Watercolor. It's about a 2-hour-long free workshop on all things watercolor. And then I also have an amazing art school on my Patreon, jennarainey.com/Patreon, where we have monthly exclusive tutorials, live Q&As, and a live painting class every single month with yours truly. And there's also an art community where there's hundreds and hundreds of students in there sharing their artwork, getting feedback from other people, asking questions, getting answers. I'm in there sharing tips and tricks and answering people's questions as well. So make sure you check that out. And as always, thank you so much for watching these videos. Make sure to comment below if you enjoyed this video, if you learned something new, and I'll see you in the next video.